My name is Clara Holloway. For most of my life, I felt like a watercolor painting left out in the rain, the colors bleeding at the edges, the lines blurring, the original image lost to the elements. I grew up in Port Blossom, a small city tucked into a fold of Washington's coastline, a place where the air smells of salt and damp pine, and the sky is a perpetual, soft focus gray. It's a beautiful place, a gentle place, but the house I was raised in held a different kind of atmosphere altogether. It was a house of sharp angles and unspoken rules, presided over by my mother, Eleanor. I work as a data archivist for a historical preservation society, a job that suits my temperament. I find solace in the quiet order of things, in piecing together narratives from faded letters and brittle ledgers. It's a job about finding the truth, no matter how deeply it's been buried. I suppose, in the end, that was the skill I brought home. Our family gatherings were not celebrations, but careful performances. We'd convene for Sunday lunch, a tradition my mother insisted upon, held at a sterile, waterfront restaurant called the Gilded Tern. The view of the Puget Sound was always magnificent, ferries gliding like stoic white ghosts across the slate-gray water, but the beauty of the world outside only ever highlighted the chill within. This particular Sunday began like any other. The linen was stiff, the silverware heavy, and the conversation as thin as tracing paper. My mother, Eleanor, sat at the head of the table, her posture impeccable, her smile a beautiful, empty frame. Opposite her was her husband, Richard, a man whose presence was as substantial as a shadow. And beside me, my younger brother, Leo, slouched over his plate, scrolling through his phone with an air of profound boredom. "Clara, dear," Eleanor began, her voice a polished stone, smooth but hard. "Richard was just saying how you seem a bit adrift." I looked up from my crab cakes. They were, as always, more breadcrumb than crab. "Adrift? I'm not sure what you mean." "Well, this job of yours. All that time with dusty old papers. It's hardly ambitious, is it? We just worry you're not building a life for yourself. You're floating." She took a delicate sip of her Chardonnay. "You have to have a foundation, something solid. Otherwise, you're just scenery. Someone people pass by without a second thought." Leo snorted, a small, sharp sound of derision. "It's true. No offense, Clara, but half the time I forget you're even living with us." He said it with a laugh, as if sharing an amusing family joke at my expense. He'd been saying versions of that my whole life. For years, I had perfected the art of absorbing these moments. I would let the words land, feel their sting, and then carefully pack them away in some deep, soundproofed room inside myself. I would offer a tight, non-committal smile. I would change the subject. I would become smaller, quieter, less of a target. But something was different today. For the past 3 months, while living in the cold, drafty sun porch of their sprawling homia space, they offered me with the kind of magnanimous sigh reserved for taking in a stray cat. I had been doing more than just archiving old city records. I had been conducting a quiet excavation of my own. I placed my fork down, the silver tines resting gently against the side of my water glass, producing a faint, clear chime that cut through the low murmur of the restaurant. The sound was small, but it was enough. All 3 of them looked at me. The performance had been interrupted. "I have something for you," I said, my voice even and calm. It didn't feel like my own voice. It felt like a clearer, stronger version I was borrowing from the woman I hoped to become. I reached into my tote bag, which was resting by my feet. It was a simple canvas bag, filled with my usual things: a book, a notebook, a wallet, and a single, slim manila folder. I slid it across the white tablecloth. It made a soft, sibilant sound as it moved over the linen, coming to a stop just beside my mother's bread plate. Leo looked at it with mild curiosity, as if I were about to present a new dessert menu. Richard leaned forward slightly, his expression one of mild confusion. But my mother stared at the folder as if it were a coiled snake. Her hand, which had been poised to lift her wine glass, froze in midair. There was no grand speech, no accusation. Just the folder, sitting in the silence. Slowly, as if it might burn her, she reached out and drew it toward her. Her painted nails, a perfect, bloodless shade of shell pink, trembled almost imperceptibly as she opened the clasp. She lifted the first page, then the second. I watched her face. It was like watching a landscape change in fast motion, a pristine snowfield cracking to reveal the dark, frozen earth beneath. The carefully constructed mask of maternal concern dissolved, replaced by a stark, whitening shock. Her breath hitched. Richard, sensing the shift, leaned over. "Eleanor? What is it?" She didn't answer him. Her eyes darted back and forth across the page, devouring the words, but they were not nourishing her. They were poisoning her. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the papers. When she finally looked up at me, the polite indifference was gone. In its place was a raw, unfiltered fury. "You," she whispered, the words sharp and brittle. "You wretched little girl." Richard snatched the pages from her hand. His own smug composure evaporated as he read. His face went from ruddy to ashen in a matter of seconds. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. "You were supposed to have destroyed all of his old things." I stood up, carefully folding my napkin and placing it on the table. I picked up my bag. The world around us, the clatter of other diners, the distant cry of a gull seemed to have faded into a dull roar. "The originals are with people who know what to do with them," I said, the quiet strength still holding in my voice. "This is just your copy. For your records." And then I turned and walked away. I didn't run. I didn't look back. I walked through the restaurant, past the curious glances of other patrons, and out into the cool, misty air of the waterfront. The gray sky felt like a blessing, a soft blanket over a raw wound. I didn't have a plan for what came next. I only knew that I had finally stopped floating. I had found my foundation, and it was made of truth. To understand the weight of that folder, you have to understand the architecture of our family. From the outside, we were the picture of Port Blossom success. We lived in a beautiful cedar-shingled house on a bluff overlooking the Sound, a home filled with art and light. My mother, Eleanor, was a pillar of the local community, organizing charity auctions and sitting on the board of the Arts Council. My stepfather, Richard, who had been my father's business partner, ran the successful architectural firm, Evergreen Designs, that my father had built from the ground up. Leo was the golden son, the athlete, the charming, effortless boy who could do no wrong. And then there was me. I was the quiet corner of the painting, the part that didn't quite fit the composition. I wasn't difficult or rebellious. I was simply other. Where Leo was praised for a C+ in history because he's not academically inclined, but his heart is in the right place, my A in calculus would be met with, "Why not an A, Clara? You can't afford to be complacent." When I won a regional award for a meticulously researched historical essay in high school, my mother glanced at the certificate and said, "That's nice, dear. Just try not to get lost in the past." 2 weeks later, she threw a lavish party for Leo when his lacrosse team won a minor local tournament. His trophy sat on the mantelpiece for years. Mine was put in a box in the attic. It wasn't overt cruelty, not most of the time. It was a more insidious kind of erosion, a constant, low-grade dismissal that taught me, over years, that my thoughts, my passions, my very presence were of a lesser value. You learn to make yourself small. You learn to apologize for taking up space. You learn that love in your family is a finite resource and your portion has already been allocated elsewhere. The only person who had ever made me feel truly seen was my father, Samuel. He was a quiet man, thoughtful and kind, with a laugh that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He didn't run the family with an iron will like my mother. He filled it with warmth. He was the one who taught me how to identify the constellations on clear summer nights, who would listen for hours as I explained the intricate plots of the fantasy novels I adored, who saw my love for history not as a quaint hobby, but as a deep and fascinating curiosity. He was the one who, when I showed him my first clumsy drawing of our house, didn't criticize the crooked lines but said, "Look at that. You've captured the feeling of home." He and my mother were like oil and water. Her sharp, ambitious energy constantly grated against his calm, contemplative nature. She called it a lack of drive, I saw it as a quiet strength. The tension in the house was a constant hum, a baseline of discord that I grew so used to I barely noticed it. Until the day it exploded. I was 12. I came home from school to find my mother waiting for me in the living room. The television was off. The air was heavy and still. That was never a good sign. "Clara, sit down," she said, her voice unnaturally solemn. "We need to talk about your father." She told me that she had discovered things. Terrible things. She said he had been reckless with the company's finances, that he had put the family's future in jeopardy. She painted a picture of a man I didn't recognize, irresponsible, deceitful, and unstable. Then she produced the final, damning piece of evidence. It was a printed email, the text dark and black against the white paper. She slid it in front of me. "I want you to see this," she said, her voice breaking with practiced sorrow. "You need to understand why I have to do this. To protect us." The email was ostensibly from my father, sent to Richard. It was a long, rambling tirade, full of accusations and threats. But one line was seared into my memory, highlighted in yellow. "If you try to take my company and my daughter, I will burn everything to the ground, and you with it." I remember the feeling of the world tilting on its axis. The man who taught me to be gentle with lightning bugs, who helped me build a birdhouse for wrens, who cried during sad movie, this man couldn't have written those words. It didn't compute. But my mother was there, her arm around my shoulder, her voice a soft, convincing murmur. She was scared. She was the victim. He was dangerous. The divorce was swift and brutal. My father was cast as the villain. He lost everything, his stake in the company he had founded, the house he had designed, and, most devastatingly, me. My mother filed for, and was granted, sole custody, citing his emotional instability and threatening behavior, using that email as her primary evidence. He was allowed no contact. He was erased. I was told to be grateful for my mother's strength. I was told we were safer now. I learned to live in the new silence, the space where my father used to be. For years, I packed the memory of him away. I put him in a box labeled dangerous and pushed it to the very back of my mind. It was easier to believe the lie than to live with the terrifying cognitive dissonance of it all. If I questioned that one central lie, the entire foundation of my world would crumble. And I wasn't strong enough for that. Not then. But the human heart has a long memory. As I grew older, moving out and building my own quiet life, the questions began to surface like splinters working their way out of my skin. Small inconsistencies. Memories of his kindness that refused to align with the portrait of a monster. The ache of his absence never dulled. It just changed shape, becoming a constant, low thrum of unanswered grief. The turning point came on my 25th birthday. I was sitting alone in my small apartment, surrounded by the quiet company of my books, and I was overcome with a profound sense of loss. I realized I had been mourning a man who was still alive. On impulse, I found an old, saved contact in my phone, a number I hadn't looked at in over a decade. My fingers trembled as I typed. "Hi. It's Clara. I don't know if this is still your number, but I just wanted to say hello." I hit send before I could lose my nerve. My heart hammered against my ribs. 15 minutes later, my phone buzzed. "Clara. My God. I've been hoping you would call for 13 years. That was the beginning. That was the moment I started digging." We met a week later in Madrona Park, a neutral space of green lawns and old, sprawling trees. I chose it because it was public, open. A part of me, the part that had been conditioned for 13 years, was still afraid. I watched him walk toward me across the grass, and the first thing I noticed was that he looked smaller than I remembered. His hair was more silver than brown, and there were deep lines etched around his eyes, but the eyes themselves were the same kind, intelligent and full of a deep, weary sadness. There were no accusations, no demands for an explanation. We just talked. We walked along the paths, buying coffee from a cart and sitting on a bench overlooking the water. We talked about my job, about his new, quiet life as a freelance draftsman, about books and weather and the way the city had changed. It was awkward and beautiful all at once, like finding a precious object you thought was lost forever, only to see it's been scuffed and damaged by time. Finally, as the afternoon light began to fade, I took a deep breath and asked the question that had been sitting like a stone in my chest for half my life. "The email," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "The one you sent to Richard. Why did you write it?" He didn't look away. He just shook his head slowly, a profound weariness settling over him. "Clara, I never wrote that email. I never would have. They said I sent it from a public library computer. By the time my lawyer and I tried to track it down, any security footage was long gone. It was my word against a printed piece of paper, and your mother is very, very convincing." He looked down at his hands. "She told the court I was a threat to you. It was the only thing that could have made me walk away. To protect you, even if it meant you had to be protected from a version of me that wasn't real." And in that moment, sitting on that park bench with the smell of damp earth around us, I believed him. It wasn't a logical decision. It was a visceral one. It felt like a bone long broken, finally setting back into place. The deep, internal alarm that had been ringing softly for years finally went silent. The truth didn't bring me peace, not at first. It brought a cold, clarifying rage. A rage for the father I had lost, and for the girl who had been forced to believe she was unloved by him. It was that cold fire that propelled me forward. My job as an archivist had given me a unique set of skills: patience, a meticulous eye for detail, and a deep understanding of how to follow a paper trail. I decided to put those skills to a different use. I enrolled in online courses for digital forensics and corporate law, not for a degree, but for the knowledge. I spent my nights and weekends learning about metadata, IP tracing, and the labyrinthine world of shell corporations. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. I wanted to reclaim the truth. Then came the hardest part of the plan. I manufactured a crisis. I told my mother I was being laid off, that my landlord was selling my building, that I was overwhelmed and couldn't afford a new place. I played the part of the adrift, aimless daughter she always believed me to be. The performance was humiliating, but necessary. Eleanor, after a great deal of sighing about the inconvenience, offered me the sun porch. It was a long, narrow room at the back of the house, lined with windows and perpetually cold, even in the summer. It was where they stored old patio furniture and stacks of magazines. It was not a bedroom. It was a storage space for things that were not quite valuable enough to keep, but too much trouble to throw away. It was, I thought with a grim sense of irony, the perfect metaphor for my place in the family. For 3 months, I lived a double life. By day, I was the quiet, grateful daughter, doing chores, running errands, and enduring their casual dismissals. I washed Richard's expensive shirts, listened to Leo complain about his entry-level job, and accepted my mother's backhanded compliments about my newfound sense of responsibility. I was a ghost in their house, and because they had never paid me much attention, they didn't notice a thing. But at night, after they were asleep, I would get to work. The key was an old desktop computer of Richard's, stored in the back of a closet, a machine he hadn't used in years, but hadn't bothered to wipe clean. It was a digital graveyard of their lives. Getting past the password was the first hurdle, but years of his lazy security habits made it surprisingly easy. His password was, and I am not making this up, Evergreen 1. Inside, I found everything. It wasn't neatly organized. It was a chaotic mess of poorly labeled folders, finances, old docs, miscellaneous, but I am patient. I am a professional searcher. And in a folder labeled Transition, I found it. A series of Word documents. Drafts of the email my father had supposedly sent. There were multiple versions, with notes in the comments from my mother to Richard. Too aggressive, sounds unhinged, not just angry. Richard, can you rephrase this part? It needs to sound more professionally desperate. And there, in the metadata of the final version, was the creation date, 5 days before it was supposedly sent from that library computer. That was the bomb. But there was more. I found the financial records. My mother's story was that my father had nearly bankrupted the firm with a series of catastrophic investments. The reality, laid out in scanned bank statements and wire transfer receipts, was a systematic and deliberate siphoning of funds. Over a period of 2 years leading up to the divorce, Eleanor and Richard had moved hundreds of thousands of dollars from the company's accounts into offshore shell corporations registered in Richard's name. They hadn't just pushed my father out, they had stolen his life's work from under him, then used a fabricated email to destroy his character and ensure he couldn't fight back. I spent weeks carefully, quietly copying every file onto a secure, encrypted drive. Each document I saved felt like a piece of my own history being set right. It was a heavy, sorrowful task. This wasn't a triumphant, gotcha moment. It was the slow, painful process of confirming that my deepest fears were true, that the people who were supposed to love me had orchestrated a breathtakingly cruel deception, not just against my father, but against me. When I had everything, I made 2 copies. One for the lawyer my father had, on my advice, quietly retained. And the other, I put in a simple manila folder. I waited for the right moment, for the next manufactured family gathering where my worth would be debated over lukewarm coffee and overpriced eggs. I didn't have to wait long. The aftermath of that Sunday lunch was not an explosion, but a series of seismic shocks. I didn't go back to the house on the bluff. I couldn't. The thought of sleeping in that cold sun porch, of breathing the same air as them, was unbearable. I used the small savings I had carefully guarded and checked into a modest extended-stay hotel on the other side of the city, a place with anonymous beige walls and a blessedly quiet room. For 2 days, there was silence. I imagined the scene in that house, the frantic whispers, the accusations, Richard's blustering denial turning to panicked calculation, Eleanor's cold fury trying to find a foothold. Then the text from Leo started. "What the hell did you do, Clara? Mom is a wreck. Richard won't stop yelling. They won't tell me what's in that stupid folder. This is insane. Whatever it is, you're tearing the family apart over it." I read them and felt a distant, hollow ache. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask for my side of the story. His only concern was the disruption to his comfortable life. The family, to Leo, was a system that existed to serve him. I had just thrown a wrench in the machine. I didn't reply. A week later, the official legal notice was delivered to their door by a courier. It was thick, heavy, and unequivocal. It detailed the lawsuit for fraud, defamation, and the recovery of stolen assets, complete with exhibits, copies of the email drafts, the wire transfer records, the correspondence between Eleanor and Richard. It was not an accusation. It was a verdict waiting to be stamped. My father called me that evening. His voice was heavy, but not with anger. It sounded like the weariness of a man who had carried a great weight for too long and was finally able to set it down. The lawyer said they have no defense, he told me, his voice quiet over the phone. It's all there, Clara. In black and white. He thinks they'll have to settle. And fast. We met for coffee the next day. He looked at me across the small table, his eyes searching my face. "You didn't have to do all this," he said softly. "You could have just walked away and built your own life. You didn't owe me this." "I didn't do it for you, Dad," I replied, and the words felt truer than anything I had ever said. "I did it for the 12-year-old girl who was taught to be afraid of her own father. I did it for me." He reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. His palm was warm and calloused. "Thank you," he whispered. The legal battle was short and brutal. Eleanor and Richard, faced with irrefutable evidence that would not only cost them their fortune, but could also lead to criminal charges, capitulated. They were forced to liquidate their assets to pay back what they had stolen from my father, with 13 years of interest and penalties. The beautiful house on the bluff, the house I grew up in, the house my father had designed, went on the market. Richard's name was stripped from Evergreen Designs, and control of the firm was returned to its rightful founder. Eleanor did not go down quietly. In a last, desperate act of malice, she sent me an email. The subject line was simply, "A mother's disappointment." The body was a long, rambling screed about my betrayal, my ingratitude, how I had destroyed the family out of spite. It was filled with justifications about how she had done what she had to do to secure a good life for her children, how my father was weak and would have run the company into the ground anyway. She was rewriting history even as it was being legally corrected. "You were always such a cold, difficult child," she wrote. "I hope you're happy with the ruins you've created." She signed it, "Your mother." I read the email once, then moved it to a folder I named Reference. I did not reply. There was nothing left to say. There is no arguing with people who have built their entire reality on a foundation of lies. To them, the truth will always feel like a personal attack. As for Leo, once the money was gone, so was he. He moved to another state to live with a friend, his only goodbye a terse text message, "Hope you're satisfied." The easy charm, the casual confidence seat had all been underwritten by a privilege he hadn't earned and didn't even know he had. When the foundation crumbled, so did he. Months have passed. The autumn rains have returned to Port Blossom, washing the city clean. The air is crisp and the leaves on the maple trees in Madrona Park are turning a brilliant, fiery gold. My father bought a small house, a modest craftsman bungalow with a wide front porch and a garden that needs tending. It's not grand like the house on the bluff, but it's filled with a quiet, steady peace. He has started taking on small architectural projects again, his passion for design rekindled. Sometimes I go over on Sunday afternoons. We don't have lavish lunches. We sit on his porch, drinking tea and talking, or sometimes not talking at all, just sharing the comfortable silence. One afternoon, he brought out a dusty box from his garage. "I kept a few things," he said. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was my 5th grade historical essay award and a framed drawing I'd done of our old house, the one with the crooked lines. He had saved them all these years. He hung them in his new study. I'm still living in my own small apartment, surrounded by my books and my quiet life. But something inside me has fundamentally changed. The feeling of being a watercolor left in the rain is gone. The lines of who I am feel clearer now, more defined. I've learned that boundaries are not walls to keep others out, but fences to protect the garden of your own soul. I've learned that self-respect is not something you are given, it's something you build, one true and honest action at a time. I don't know if my mother and I will ever speak again. Perhaps one day, years from now, a different kind of conversation will be possible, one free of blame and delusion. Or perhaps not. Reconciliation requires that both people stand on the common ground of truth, and I don't know if she will ever be willing or able to walk there. But I am no longer waiting for her to see me. I am no longer performing for her approval. The story she told about Medhad was scenery, that I was adrift, that I was a nobody was just that, a story. By unearthing their secrets, I unearthed my own strength. They thought I was a ghost in their house, but it turns out I was the archivist, the one person who was quietly keeping track of it all. And when the time came, I simply opened the folder and let the truth speak for itself. It was the quietest, most powerful thing I have ever done.